All right, well, Federal Reserve officials and central bankers from around the world are meeting in Jackson Hole, Wyoming right now for an annual economic conference. Now, of course, the Fed has been in the spotlight after President Trump's repeated criticisms of Chair Jerome Powell, someone he put in that job. And of course, the market has been demanding more interest rate cuts. So let's go to Jackson Hole right now, where we find Yahoo Finance's Brian Cheung. So, Brian, this has to be the most stressful Jackson Hole meeting in quite some time. Thank goodness for that calm, serene backdrop there in Wyoming.
Yeah, that's right, Scott. So it's beautiful out here, but there is definitely an air of concern here in Jackson Hole amid all the issues that central bankers are facing, with rates across the board in many corners of the world so close to zero, in some cases in negative territory, and the Federal Reserve, as you mentioned, Scott, facing pressure from the White House as well. But what is in view is some of the dissenting views in terms of the rate cuts that we saw July 31st. So Esther George, the president of the Kansas City Fed, was one of the two members who voted against that decision, preferring to keep rates the same. In her explanation for that dissent, she said that she honestly wanted to see where the data goes. She wanted to see the material impact of the trade war first. And I had the chance to ask her about whether or not since that meeting, the data has pointed to further rate cuts. Here's what she had to say.
We've had mixed data again. So you saw retail sales come in very strong. There have continued to be concerns, uncertainty around trade that factors into that. So I think it's too soon to judge how the real economy is going to be affected. So I'll be watching the data up until the time that meeting starts. And frankly, going into that meeting, I want to continue to be open-minded about this as I listen to my colleagues and how they judge how some of these risks are playing into the economy.
And again, had the chance to sit down with Esther George here on the sidelines of the Jackson Hole Conference, which actually begins tonight with the welcome dinner. It'll extend through Saturday. We'll have the full live coverage of that for you here on Yahoo Finance. You can also catch that interview and clips from it on yahoofinance.com.
Brian, are you able to gauge a reaction right now, A, to the sort of release of the minutes, and then B, in a couple of those clips from your great interview with Esther George, the remark that kind of just echoing what Jay Powell said initially that upset people so much in July when we got the cut, which was this isn't the start of a new era of cutting?
Yeah, well, I had the chance to ask Esther George about the FOMC minutes, which, as you recall, were released yesterday in the afternoon. And what was so interesting about those minutes is that it really showed quite a wide spectrum of views on the FOMC about what the next steps or what the proper steps for that July 31st meeting should have been. On one end, you had some members, I think they noted a couple, so two members, who advocated for a 50 basis point cut in that July 31st meeting. Then you had some advocating for the 25 basis point cut, which the Fed ultimately ended up doing. But then you had Esther George and then also Boston Fed President Eric Rosengren saying on the other end that they didn't see a case for any rate cut or rate change at all. So that's a real challenge for Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who has had to message what is supposed to be the middle line decision there, even though that the range of views on the FOMC is so wide. So Esther George saying that she thinks that Jerome Powell has done a good job. He's already made efforts on transparency by just simply having press conferences at every single FOMC meeting. She said that he's doing the best that he can, but it did acknowledge that there are challenges as we get to this inflection point in monetary policy about what the next steps might be and how to communicate those next steps to the public.
All right, Brian, thank you very much. Good work out there.